They say patience is a virtue, but I never imagined that my careful, measured steps would become the very thing that exposed the greedy hearts of those closest to me. What started as complaints about my walking pace ended with them crawling on. Their knees, begging for mercy, I was no longer willing to give. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Eleanor Hartwell, and at 72, I've learned that the most dangerous predators are often the ones who share your dinner table. For 35 years, I built Hartwell Financial Advisory from a single desk in my garage into one of the most respected wealth management firms in Seattle. What most people didn't know was that behind my gentle demeanor and admittedly slow gait lay the sharp mind of a woman who had navigated every financial storm the market could throw at her. The irony wasn't lost on me that the very people who would eventually try to destroy me were the ones I had lifted from poverty and given everything to. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, when I still believed that blood meant loyalty and kindness would be repaid with gratitude. It was a crisp October morning when my nephew Marcus Chen and his wife Jessica first moved into my Bellevue estate. I remember the day clearly because I had just returned from my morning walk around the neighborhood, a ritual I'd maintained for decades despite my increasingly deliberate pace. The arthritis in my left knee had been acting up lately, forcing me to take my time on the uneven sidewalks, but I refused to let it stop me from my daily exercise. Marcus was waiting by my front door, shifting his weight from foot to foot with that familiar impatience that had marked his personality since childhood. At 34, he still carried himself with the restless energy of someone who believed the world owed him speed and immediate gratification. Jessica stood beside him, her designer handbag clutched tightly against her perfectly coordinated outfit, her expression a mask of practiced sweetness that I had grown accustomed to over the years. "Aunt Eleanor," Marcus called out as I approached, his voice carrying that tone of barely contained frustration that I pretended not to notice. "We've been waiting here for 20 minutes. Your walk is getting longer and longer every day." Fumbled with my keys, my fingers moving deliberately as I always did, taking care not to drop anything. "I'm sorry, dear. The morning air was particularly lovely today, and I wanted to enjoy it while I could." Jessica stepped forward, her smile bright but somehow cold around the edges. "Eleanor, sweetie, maybe it's time to consider that your walking routine might be a bit excessive? You're not as young as you used to be, and we worry about you being out there alone for so long." There it was, wrapped in concern but delivered like a gentle scolding. The implication that my independence was somehow a burden to them, that my choices needed their approval. I had heard variations of this conversation more times than I cared to count, but something about Jessica's tone that morning struck me differently. There was an edge to it, a hint of something that made me pause and really look at her face. "I appreciate your concern," I said carefully, finally getting the door open and stepping aside to let them in. "But my doctor says the exercise is good for me, keeps the mind sharp." Marcus brushed past me into the foyer, already scanning the space with those calculating eyes that had become more pronounced over the past year. "Speaking of keeping things sharp, we wanted to talk to you about some financial matters. Jessica and I have been doing some research, and we think there might be some better investment opportunities for your portfolio." I set my purse down on the antique console table that had belonged to my grandmother, the same woman who had taught me that trust was something to be earned, not freely given. "Oh? What kind of opportunities?" Jessica had made herself comfortable on my living room sofa, her legs crossed elegantly as she gestured toward the coffee table where she had apparently laid out several folders during my absence. "We've been working with a fantastic financial advisor, someone who specializes in high-net-worth clients. His name is David Reeves, and he's shown us some absolutely incredible returns that he could achieve with your assets." The mention of another financial advisor made me pause. I had spent my entire career in this field, had built my reputation on careful, conservative growth strategies that protected my clients' wealth through every market downturn. The idea that Marcus and Jessica thought I needed outside help managing my own finances was both insulting and suspicious. "I've been managing my own investments quite successfully for decades," I said, settling into my favorite armchair with the careful movements that had become second nature. "My current portfolio has weathered every recession and provided steady growth. I'm not sure why I would need to change strategies now." Marcus leaned forward, his expression earnest in that way that had once melted my heart when he was a struggling college student asking for tuition money. "Aunt Eleanor, we're not questioning your expertise. We're just saying that maybe it's time to let someone else handle the day-to-day stress of portfolio management. You've worked so hard for so many years. Don't you deserve to relax and enjoy your retirement?" There was something about the way he said "relax" that sent a small chill down my spine. It sounded less like a suggestion and more like a directive, as if they had already decided what my future should look like and were simply waiting for me to comply. "I find managing my investments quite relaxing, actually," I replied. "It keeps me engaged and gives me a sense of purpose. I'm not ready to hand over control of my financial future to a stranger." Jessica's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course, Eleanor. We would never want to pressure you into anything. We just thought you might appreciate having more time for other activities. Maybe shorter walks, more time spent at home where it's safe and comfortable." The way she said "safe" made it sound like the outside world was full of dangers specifically, designed to harm elderly women who dared to venture beyond their front doors. It was a subtle form of manipulation that I recognized from my years of dealing with financial predators who targeted seniors, and the fact that it was coming from my own family made my stomach turn. "I appreciate your concern," I said again, using the same measured tone I had perfected in countless difficult client meetings. "But I'm quite capable of making my own decisions about both my finances and my daily activities." Marcus stood up abruptly, his patience clearly at an end. "Fine, but don't say we didn't try to help when you find yourself in trouble because you were too stubborn to accept good advice." The accusation of stubbornness stung because it wasn't the first time I had heard it. Over the past year, as my walking pace had slowed and my need for deliberate movement had increased, Marcus and Jessica had grown increasingly vocal about what they saw as my declining capabilities. Every careful step was evidence of frailty. Every moment of consideration was proof of confusion. Every independent choice was an act of dangerous rebellion against their well-meaning guidance. After they left that morning, I sat in my living room surrounded by the folders they had forgotten to take with them. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened the first one to find detailed information about David Reeves and his investment firm. The returns he promised were impressive, almost too impressive, and the testimonials from satisfied clients read like marketing copy rather than genuine experiences. What caught my attention, however, was a handwritten note tucked between the pages. In Jessica's distinctive script, it read, "Remember to emphasize the walking issue. Make her feel like she's becoming a burden. The slower she moves, the faster we can move on the financial stuff." I read the note 3 times, each reading making my hands tremble more than the last. The casual cruelty of it, the calculated manipulation, the way they had turned my physical limitations into weapons against my independence. It was all there in black and white, proof that their concern was nothing more than a performance designed to make me question my own judgment. That evening, I called my longtime attorney, Patricia Sullivan, a sharp woman in her 50s who had handled my legal affairs for over a decade. Patricia had built her practice on protecting the interests of successful women, and she had an intuitive understanding of the unique vulnerabilities that came with age and wealth. "Eleanor," she said when I explained the situation, "I want you to be very careful here. What you're describing sounds like the early stages of a financial exploitation scheme. The fact that it's coming from family members makes it both more dangerous and more difficult to address. What do you mean more dangerous? Family members have access to your personal information, your daily routines, your emotional triggers. They know exactly which buttons to push to make you doubt yourself. The walking comments, the suggestions about your declining capabilities, the introduction of an outside financial advisor. These are all classic tactics designed to isolate you from your support systems and make you more dependent on them. Patricia's words confirmed what my instincts had been telling me, but hearing them spoken aloud made the reality of my situation hit home. The people I had trusted, the family members I had supported through college, career changes, and financial difficulties, were actively working to undermine my independence and gain control of my assets. What should I do? For now, document everything, every conversation, every suggestion, every comment about your abilities or your walking. Keep copies of anything they give you, and don't sign anything without having me review it first. And Eleanor? Trust your instincts. You've built a successful business by reading people and situations correctly. Don't let anyone convince you that age has somehow erased that ability. After hanging up with Patricia, I sat in my study surrounded by the financial documents and family photos that told the story of my life. There were pictures of Marcus as a young boy, visiting during summer vacations when his parents were going through their difficult divorce. I remembered how lost and scared he had seemed, how eager he was for stability and affection. I had opened my home and my heart to him, paying for his education and helping him get started in his career. There were photos of Jessica, too, from their wedding 5 years ago. I had paid for that extravagant ceremony, convinced that Marcus had found someone who would make him happy and help him become the man I believed he could be. Looking at those pictures now, I wondered if I had missed the signs of what they would eventually become, or if the seeds of their greed had been planted long before I noticed them growing. The next few weeks passed in a strange routine of normalcy, punctuated by increasingly aggressive suggestions about my lifestyle. Marcus and Jessica began visiting more frequently, always with new ideas about how I could improve my life by limiting my independence. They brought printouts about the dangers of walking alone at my age, statistics about falls and injuries, and testimonials from other seniors who had found happiness in more sedentary lifestyles. "Aunt Eleanor," Marcus said during one particularly persistent visit, "we found this wonderful assisted living community just 15 minutes from here. It's not that we think you need full-time care, but they have amazing amenities, and you wouldn't have to worry about maintaining this big house anymore." I looked around my living room, taking in the antique furniture I had collected over decades, the artwork I had chosen with care, the books that represented a lifetime of learning and growth. The idea of leaving all of this behind to live in a generic apartment surrounded by strangers felt like a form of death, a premature burial of everything that made me who I was. "I'm quite happy here," I said. "This house holds too many memories for me to consider leaving." Jessica leaned forward with that concerned expression she had perfected. "But Eleanor, honey, don't you think those memories might be holding you back? Sometimes letting go of the past is the healthiest thing we can do. And think about how much easier your life would be without all the responsibility of homeownership." The suggestion that my memories were somehow unhealthy, that my connection to my own history was a burden rather than a treasure, revealed a level of emotional manipulation that took my breath away. They weren't just after my money. They wanted to erase my identity, to transform me into a compliant version of myself that would be easier to control. "I think I'll stay put for now," I said firmly. "But thank you for the suggestion." Marcus's jaw tightened with frustration. "You're being unreasonable, Aunt Eleanor. We're trying to help you, but you keep resisting every practical suggestion we make. Your walking is getting slower every day, you're isolated out here in this big house, and you're making financial decisions without consulting anyone who might have a different perspective." The accusation of unreasonableness was particularly galling because it was so clearly designed to make me doubt my own judgment. By framing my independence as stubbornness and my careful decision-making as isolation, they were trying to create a narrative in which I was the problem that needed to be solved. "My walking pace may be slower than it used to be," I said carefully, "but my mind is as sharp as ever. And I've been making sound financial decisions for longer than you've been alive." "Have you, though?" Jessica interjected. "Because David Reeves looked at some of your recent portfolio moves, and he said there were some concerning patterns that might indicate—" She trailed off, but the implication hung in the air like poison gas. They were suggesting that my investment decisions showed signs of cognitive decline, that my professional expertise was somehow compromised by age. It was a devastating attack, because it targeted the very core of my identity and accomplishments. "Mr. Reeves reviewed my portfolio without my permission?" I asked quietly. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "Well, not exactly. We just showed him some general information to get his opinion on whether you might benefit from professional guidance." The violation of trust was breathtaking. They had taken information about my private financial affairs and shared it with a stranger for the purpose of building a case against my competency. It was not only unethical, but potentially illegal, and the casual way Marcus admitted to it showed how little respect they had for my privacy or autonomy. That night, I called Patricia again and told her about the latest developments. Her reaction was immediate and alarmed. "Eleanor, this is escalating quickly. The fact that they're involving outside parties and questioning your mental capacity suggests they might be preparing for a more aggressive approach. I think it's time to take some protective measures." "What kind of measures?" "First, I want you to undergo a comprehensive cognitive evaluation with a geriatrician. Get official documentation that your mental faculties are intact. Second, we need to review all of your financial accounts and make sure Marcus and Jessica don't have any access or signature authority. Third, I think you should consider installing some discrete security cameras in your home. The idea of spying on my own family felt like a betrayal of everything I believed about trust and relationships. But Patricia's concern was infectious. If Marcus and Jessica were willing to share my private financial information with strangers, what other boundaries were they prepared to cross? Over the next few days, I followed Patricia's advice methodically. The cognitive evaluation was both humiliating and vindicating, as I was forced to prove my mental competency through a series of tests that would have been insulting under different circumstances. But the results were unambiguous. My cognitive function was well within normal ranges for my age, and the doctor noted that my careful, deliberate approach to physical movement was actually a sign of wisdom rather than decline. Reviewing my financial accounts revealed a disturbing pattern I had somehow missed. Marcus had been listed as a secondary contact on several of my investment accounts, a detail I remembered authorizing years ago when he was helping me transition to online banking. What I hadn't realized was that this designation gave him access to detailed information about my transactions and holdings, information he had apparently been sharing with David Reeves. The security camera installation was handled by a discreet company that specialized in protecting elderly clients from financial abuse. The technician, a kind woman named Sarah, explained that elder financial abuse was one of the fastest-growing crimes in America, and that family members were responsible for the majority of cases. "The hardest part," Sarah said as she positioned a tiny camera in my living room bookshelf, "is that the victims often don't want to believe what's happening. They keep making excuses for the abusers because acknowledging the truth means accepting that people they love don't actually love them." Back. Her words hit me like a physical blow because they perfectly described my own internal struggle. Part of me still wanted to believe that Marcus and Jessica's behavior came from a place of genuine concern, that their increasing demands and manipulations were misguided attempts to help rather than calculated efforts to exploit. But that hope was about to be shattered completely by what I discovered next. It was a Tuesday morning in November when, I returned from my usual walk to find Marcus and Jessica in my kitchen, going through my mail. They had let themselves in using the spare key I had given them for emergencies, and they were sorting through my correspondence with the casual efficiency of people who had done this many times before. "Oh, Aunt Eleanor," Marcus said when he noticed me standing in the doorway. "We were just helping you organize your mail. There were some important-looking documents that we thought you might have missed." The important-looking documents turned out to be statements from my investment accounts, tax documents, and correspondence from my attorney. They had opened everything and were apparently cataloging the contents, creating what looked like a comprehensive inventory of my financial affairs. "I can manage my own mail," I said, trying to keep my voice level despite the rage building in my chest. "I don't need help with that." Jessica looked up from a bank statement she was examining with the kind of intense focus usually reserved for studying evidence. "Eleanor, sweetie, we're just worried that you might overlook something important. Your walking has been taking longer and longer lately, and we noticed you seem more tired when you get back. We thought maybe handling all this paperwork was becoming overwhelming for you." Once again, they were using my walking pace as evidence of decline, turning my careful navigation of uneven sidewalks into proof that I was losing my ability to function independently. It was a masterful manipulation because it took something I couldn't completely control, the physical effects of aging, and used it to justify their invasion of my privacy. "My walking pace has nothing to do with my ability to read my own mail," I said firmly. "Please put those documents down and leave my kitchen." Marcus straightened up, his expression shifting from false concern to barely contained irritation. "Aunt Eleanor, we're family. We're trying to help you, but you keep pushing us away. Maybe it's time to admit that you need more support than you're willing to acknowledge." The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. If I continued to resist their help, they would escalate their efforts to prove that I was incompetent. They would use my walking pace, my age, and my insistence on independence as evidence that I needed someone else to make my decisions for me. "I appreciate your concern," I said for what felt like the 100th time, "but I'm perfectly capable of managing my own affairs. Please leave my mail alone and respect my privacy." Jessica stood up slowly, her movements deliberately theatrical. "Eleanor, I think we need to have a serious conversation about your future. Your stubbornness is becoming dangerous, and we can't just stand by and watch you make decisions that could hurt you." The word dangerous was clearly chosen for maximum impact. By framing my independence as a threat to my own well-being, they were setting the stage for more aggressive interventions. I could see the path they were laying out. First, they would establish that my judgment was compromised. Then, they would position themselves as the responsible family members who needed to step in for my own protection. That evening, I reviewed the security camera footage from my laptop, fast-forwarding through hours of empty rooms until I reached the morning's invasion of my kitchen. Watching Marcus and Jessica rifle through my personal documents with such casual entitlement was like seeing strangers in my home. These weren't the people I had helped and supported over the years. They were predators who had been studying my vulnerabilities and planning their attack. But it was the audio that truly broke my heart. "Look at this," Jessica's voice came through clearly as she held up one of my investment statements. "She's got over $3 million in this account alone. No wonder she's so paranoid about letting David help her manage things." Marcus laughed, a sound devoid of any affection or warmth. "The walking thing is working perfectly. Every time we mention how slow she's getting, she gets defensive and flustered. It's like she knows she's losing it, but doesn't want to admit it." "How much longer do you think we need to keep this up?" Jessica asked. "I'm getting tired of pretending to care about her boring stories and her pathetic daily routines." "Not much longer," Marcus replied. "David thinks we can have her declared incompetent within 6 months if we document enough incidents of poor judgment and declining physical capabilities. The walking complaints are building a perfect paper trail." The casual cruelty of their conversation was devastating, but it was also enlightening. They had been building a case against me, documenting every slow step and careful movement as evidence of incompetence. My deliberate pace wasn't just annoying to them. It was the foundation of their strategy to gain control of my life and assets. I sat in my study until well past midnight, watching and rewatching that footage, listening to their voices discuss my destruction with the same tone they might use to plan a vacation. By the time I finally went to bed, something fundamental had shifted inside me. The loving aunt who had always given them the benefit of the doubt was gone, replaced by someone who understood that this was war. The next morning, I called Patricia and scheduled an emergency meeting. When I walked into her office that afternoon, my movements were as slow and deliberate as ever, but my mind was crystal clear about what needed to be done. "I have everything we need to prove they're trying to exploit me," I said, handing her a USB drive with the security camera footage. "The question is, what's the best way to make them pay for it?" Patricia reviewed the footage with the grim satisfaction of a prosecutor who had just been handed a confession. "This is enough to pursue criminal charges for elder abuse and financial exploitation. But Eleanor, I think there might be a more educational approach that would serve your interests better." "What do you mean?" She leaned back in her chair with a smile that reminded me why she had built such a formidable reputation in the legal community. "They want to use your walking pace to prove you're incompetent? Let's give them exactly what they're asking for." As she outlined her plan, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: genuine excitement. Marcus and Jessica thought they were so clever, using my careful movements against me, turning my physical limitations into weapons for their financial gain. They had no idea that they were about to discover just how dangerous it could be to underestimate a woman who had spent decades navigating the shark-infested waters of high-stakes finance. The game they had started was about to take a turn they never saw coming, and by the time they realized what was happening, it would be far too late to stop what they had set in motion. They complained about my slow walking, but they were about to learn that sometimes the person who moves most carefully is the one who reaches the finish line first. My walking pace might have slowed over the years, but my mind was as sharp as ever, and I was about to prove that the most devastating attacks often come from the most unexpected directions. They wanted to see me move slowly? I was about to show them what it looked like when someone stopped moving altogether. The next phase of this story would test everything I had learned about patience, strategy, and the art of perfect timing. Marcus and Jessica thought they were hunting a vulnerable old woman, but they were about to discover that they had walked into a trap set by one of the most successful financial strategists in Seattle. And unlike my careful morning walks, this lesson was going to move very, very fast. The morning after my meeting with Patricia, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror practicing the performance that would either save my independence or destroy what remained of my relationship with Marcus and Jessica forever. The plan was elegant. In its simplicity, give them exactly what they wanted to see, but control every aspect of how they saw it. I had spent 40 years reading people's financial fears and desires, understanding what motivated them to make both wise and foolish decisions. Marcus and Jessica's motivations were crystal clear now. They wanted my money, and they wanted me out of the way. What they didn't understand was that I had built my fortune by staying 3 moves ahead of people exactly like them. Patricia's strategy was brilliant because it turned their own weapon against them. They were using my slower walking pace to build a case for my incompetence, so we would accelerate that narrative in ways they couldn't control or predict. Every step I took from now on would be carefully calculated to serve my purposes rather than theirs. The first test came that very morning when Marcus arrived for one of his increasingly frequent check-ins. I heard his car pull into my driveway, just as I was finishing my coffee, and I took a moment to center myself before beginning the most important performance of my life. When I opened the front door, I made sure to move just a fraction slower than usual, adding a slight hesitation. that hadn't been there before. It was subtle enough that Marcus would notice, but not so obvious that he would suspect it was intentional. "Good morning, Aunt Eleanor," he said, his tone carrying that familiar mix of impatience and false concern. "I was hoping to catch you before you went on your walk today." I blinked slowly, as if processing his words took more effort than it should. My walk? Oh yes, I always walk in the mornings, though I'm not sure I remembered to eat breakfast today. The lie came easily, because it was exactly what Marcus wanted to hear. I watched his eyes light up with satisfaction, and I knew he was already composing the story he would tell Jessica later about how confused and forgetful I was becoming. "Why don't you skip the walk today?" he suggested, guiding me back into the house with a hand on my elbow that felt more possessive than supportive. "Jessica and I brought some paperwork we'd like to go over with you. Nothing complicated, just some forms that David Reeves thinks would help streamline your financial management." I allowed him to lead me to the living room, moving with the careful uncertainty of someone who wasn't quite sure of her footing. In reality, I knew every inch of my home better than my own heartbeat, but Marcus didn't need to know that. Jessica was already seated on my sofa, several manila folders spread across the coffee table in front of her. She looked up as we entered, her smile bright with anticipation. "Eleanor, sweetheart, you look a little tired today. Are you feeling all right?" I touched my forehead with a trembling hand, another carefully choreographed gesture. "I'm not sure. I feel a bit confused this morning. Did I let you in?" "I don't remember hearing the doorbell. The truth was that I had deliberately left the front door unlocked after seeing Marcus's car approach, but the implication that I might have forgotten letting them in was exactly the kind of detail they would use to support their narrative of my declining mental state. Marcus and Jessica exchanged a quick glance that I pretended not to notice. "We used our key, Aunt Eleanor," Marcus said gently. "You gave it to us for emergencies, remember?" I nodded slowly, as if trying to recall something that was just beyond my grasp. "Oh yes, the key. That's right. I forget things sometimes lately." Jessica leaned forward with exaggerated concern. "Oh, Eleanor, honey, that's exactly why we're here. These little memory slips are perfectly normal for someone your age, but they're also exactly why you need people looking out for you." She gestured toward the folders on the table. "David has prepared some documents that would allow Marcus and me to help you with your day-to-day financial decisions. Nothing major, just giving us the authority to handle routine transactions so you don't have to worry about remembering all those details." I stared at the papers with an expression of bewildered gratitude. "That sounds wonderful. You're both so thoughtful to take care of me like this." What I was actually looking at were power of attorney documents that would give them broad control over my financial affairs. The language was deliberately complex and confusing, clearly designed to overwhelm someone who might be experiencing genuine cognitive decline. But my years of experience in financial services meant I could identify every clause and loophole, even while pretending to be confused by the basic concepts. "Should I sign these now?" I asked, reaching for a pen with a hand that trembled just enough to be noticeable. "Well," Marcus said quickly, "maybe we should read through them together first, just to make sure you understand what you're agreeing to." I nodded eagerly. That's probably wise. My mind isn't as sharp as it used to be. Sometimes I read things wrong or miss important details. For the next hour, I played the part of a confused elderly woman struggling to understand basic financial concepts while Marcus and Jessica explained the documents with the patience of predators who could taste victory. They highlighted the benefits of having younger, sharper minds managing my affairs, emphasized how much easier my life would be without the stress of financial decision-making, and repeatedly assured me that they had my best interests at heart. "This section here," Jessica said, pointing to a particularly complex clause, "just means that Marcus would be able to make investment decisions on your behalf. You know, moving money between accounts, buying and selling stocks, that sort of thing. Nothing you need to worry about anymore." I squinted at the document as if having trouble reading the fine print. And this part about real estate transactions? Oh, that's just in case you ever decide you want to sell the house, Marcus explained smoothly. It would save you the hassle of having to sign dozens of documents. We could handle everything for you. The casual way he mentioned selling, my house sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with my performance. They weren't just planning to control my assets. They were already envisioning a future where I had been completely displaced from my own life. I think I understand, I said slowly. But maybe I should have my lawyer look at these first. Just to be safe. The suggestion clearly frustrated them, but they couldn't object without seeming unreasonable. Of course, Jessica said with a tight smile. Though honestly, Eleanor, these are pretty standard documents. Your lawyer will probably just charge you a lot of money to tell you what we're telling you for free. I nodded as if her logic made perfect sense. You're probably right. I do worry about spending money unnecessarily these days. Everything seems so expensive. Marcus perked up at this opening. Speaking of expenses, Aunt Eleanor, Jessica and I have been talking about your monthly costs. This house is awfully big for one person, and the maintenance expenses must be enormous. Have you considered that downsizing might make more financial sense? Here it was, the conversation I had been expecting. They were escalating from gaining control of my assets to convincing me to eliminate my largest asset entirely. Once I signed those power of attorney documents and sold my house, I would be completely dependent on their goodwill for both my housing and my income. I hadn't really thought about it, I said, which was the most honest thing I had said all morning. But you might be right. This place does feel overwhelming sometimes, especially when I'm moving slowly and it takes so long to get from room to room. I watched their faces light up with excitement at my apparent willingness to consider their suggestion. They had been using my walking pace as evidence of decline for months, and now I was seemingly agreeing that it created practical problems that required drastic solutions. There's a lovely senior community just 20 minutes from here, Jessica said, already reaching for another folder. Independent living apartments designed specifically for people who want to maintain their autonomy while having access to support services when they need them. The brochure she spread on the table showed a sterile complex of identical units surrounded by manicured gardens and filled with smiling elderly residents engaged in carefully supervised activities. It looked like a place where people went to wait for death while pretending to live. It looks very nice, I said, though the words tasted like ash in my mouth. Do you think I could afford something like this? Marcus practically glowed with enthusiasm. Absolutely. Once we sell your house and consolidate your investments under David's management, you'll have more than enough to cover the monthly fees and still have plenty left over for your other needs. I picked up one of the brochures and studied it, with the intense focus of someone trying to picture herself in such a place. I suppose it would solve the walking problem. Everything looks so compact and convenient. Exactly, Jessica agreed. No more struggling with stairs or worrying about maintaining a big yard. And think about how much safer you'll be with staff available 24 hours a day. The implication that I needed constant supervision was particularly galling, but I forced myself to nod appreciatively. Safety is important at my age. I do worry sometimes about falling or getting confused. Over the next 2 hours, Marcus and Jessica painted a picture of my future that was both seductive and terrifying. They described a life free from responsibility and decision-making, where all my needs would be met by others and I could spend my remaining years in peaceful retirement. What they were actually describing was a life without agency, purpose, or independence, but they presented it as the ultimate reward for a lifetime of hard work. I think I need some time to process all of this, I said finally, gesturing vaguely at the documents and brochures scattered across my coffee table. It's a lot to take in. Marcus checked his watch with barely concealed impatience. Of course, Aunt Eleanor. But maybe don't take too long to decide. The housing market is moving quickly right now, and David mentioned that some of his investment strategies are time-sensitive. The pressure to make a quick decision was another classic manipulation tactic, designed to prevent me from thinking clearly or seeking outside advice. They wanted me to sign those documents while I was still overwhelmed and confused, before I had a chance to recover my clarity or consult with anyone who might talk me out of their plan. "I understand," I said. "Maybe just a few days to think it over?" Jessica's smile became strained. "Eleanor, sweetie, I hope you're not going to overthink this. Sometimes too much analysis can lead to paralysis, especially when the right choice is so obvious." The suggestion that careful consideration was somehow unhealthy was infuriating, but I maintained my performance of grateful confusion. "You're probably right. I do tend to worry too much about things." After they left, I sat in my living room, surrounded by their documents, and felt the full weight of what they were attempting to do to me. They weren't just trying to steal my money, they were trying to steal my entire identity, to transform me from an independent woman with agency and purpose into a compliant victim who would be grateful for their management of her diminished life. But as I reviewed the power of attorney documents with my trained eye, I also felt a growing sense of anticipation. They had made several critical errors in their rush to gain control, errors that Patricia and I would be able to exploit when the time came to turn the tables on them. That evening, I called Patricia from my landline while simultaneously recording the conversation on my cell phone, a precaution she had suggested in case Marcus and Jessica ever tried to claim I was too confused to make rational decisions about my legal representation. "How did it go?" she asked immediately. "Perfectly. They brought power of attorney documents just like you predicted, along with brochures for assisted living facilities. I played confused and grateful, and they ate it up completely." "Excellent. Did you sign anything?" "Not yet. I told them I needed a few days to think it over, which frustrated them, but they couldn't push too hard without seeming suspicious." Patricia's voice carried a note of satisfaction. "Good. That gives us time to prepare the next phase. I've been doing some research on David Reeves, and what I found is very interesting." "What kind of interesting?" "The kind that suggests Marcus and Jessica aren't his only victims. It appears Mr. Reeves has a pattern of targeting elderly clients through their family members, using emotional manipulation to gain control of their assets, then systematically draining those accounts through high-fee investments and unnecessary transactions. The revelation that Marcus and Jessica were part of a larger scheme rather than opportunistic amateurs added another layer of complexity to the situation. It also made me feel slightly better about their betrayal, since it suggested they might be victims themselves, manipulated by someone even more sophisticated than they were. What does that mean for our plan? It means we have an opportunity to do more than just protect your assets. We might be able to take down an entire network of elder financial abuse. But first, we need to let them think they're winning. Over the next few days, I continued my performance of increasing confusion and dependence. I called Marcus with questions about basic tasks I had been handling independently for decades, left messages that rambled and seemed to lose focus midway through, and made small errors in my daily routines that he would notice and document. The most difficult part was allowing my appearance to deteriorate slightly. I stopped wearing makeup, chose clothing that was clean but mismatched, and let my usually precise hairstyle become disheveled. When Marcus arrived for his daily check-ins, I made sure he found me looking like someone who was struggling to maintain her basic self-care. "Aunt Eleanor, are you feeling all right?" he asked during one visit, his voice carrying what might have been genuine concern mixed with calculation. "You seem a little off lately." I touched my hair self-consciously. "I'm fine, dear. Just having trouble remembering my routines. Did I comb my hair this morning? I can't recall." He studied my face with the intensity of someone cataloging evidence. "Maybe you should write yourself some notes. Reminders about basic daily tasks?" The suggestion that I needed written instructions for personal hygiene was both insulting and perfect for my purposes. "That's a wonderful idea. You're so thoughtful to look after me like this." Marcus pulled out his phone, and I caught him taking what looked like a discreet photograph of me in my disheveled state. The evidence gathering had begun in earnest, and I felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness, knowing that he was documenting what he believed was my deterioration for use against me later. That afternoon, Jessica arrived with a bag of groceries and a concerned expression. "Marcus told me you're having some trouble with your daily routines. I thought I'd help you organize your kitchen and maybe prepare some easy meals you can reheat." I followed her into my kitchen and watched as she rearranged my carefully organized cabinets, moving items to locations that would be more convenient for someone with mobility issues. She labeled everything with large, clear print and created a meal schedule that treated me like a child who couldn't be trusted to feed herself properly. "There," she said with satisfaction. "Now you won't have to think so hard about what to eat or where to find things." The infantilization was complete. In the span of a week, I had been transformed in their eyes from an independent woman into someone who needed supervision for the most basic aspects of daily life. The speed of the transformation should have been suspicious, but their greed made them eager to believe that my decline was accelerating. "I don't know what I would do without you and Marcus," I said, injecting just the right note of helpless gratitude into my voice. "I feel so lucky to have family who care about me." Jessica hugged me with what felt like genuine affection, and, for a moment, I wondered if she might actually believe she was helping me. The possibility that she had convinced herself that her manipulation was motivated by love rather than greed made her even more dangerous, because it meant she would be able to justify increasingly invasive interventions as necessary for my well-being. That evening, I reviewed the security camera footage from the day and felt a complex mixture of emotions watching myself play the role of a woman losing her independence. The performance was convincing because it was rooted in real fears about aging and vulnerability, fears that every elderly person carried regardless of their actual capabilities. But it was also empowering to see how completely Marcus and Jessica were buying into the narrative I was creating. They had no idea that every confused gesture and helpless moment was carefully calculated to serve my larger strategy. They thought they were documenting my decline, but they were actually documenting their own manipulation and exploitation of what they believed was a vulnerable woman. The next morning brought the phone call I had been expecting. David Reeves himself wanted to meet with me to discuss my financial future. Marcus delivered the invitation with barely contained excitement, clearly seeing this as the moment when their plan would finally be implemented. "He's very busy, Aunt Eleanor, but he's agreed to make time for you because Marcus and Jessica explained your situation. It's really an honor that someone of his caliber is willing to take on your account." I nodded with appropriate gratitude while internally preparing for the most challenging performance yet. David Reeves was a professional predator, someone who made his living by identifying and exploiting elderly victims. He would be looking for specific signs of vulnerability and confusion, and I would need to provide them without seeming obviously theatrical. "When would he like to meet?" I asked. "This afternoon, if possible. He has an opening in his schedule, and Marcus thought it would be good to strike while the iron is hot." The pressure to meet immediately was another red flag, designed to prevent me from preparing or seeking advice. Professional financial advisors typically scheduled consultations well in advance and encouraged potential clients to take time to consider their options. The urgency suggested that David Reeves operated more like a high-pressure salesman than a legitimate investment professional. "I suppose that would be fine," I said uncertainly, "though I feel a bit overwhelmed by all these big decisions." Marcus patted my shoulder with false reassurance. "Don't worry, Aunt Eleanor. David will explain everything in simple terms, and Jessica and I will be there to help you understand anything that seems confusing." The meeting was scheduled for 2 o'clock at David Reeves's office in downtown Seattle. As Marcus drove me there, chattering about how much my life was going to improve once my finances were properly managed, I reviewed my mental notes about the performance I was about to give. David Reeves's office was located in a gleaming high-rise that projected an image of success and reliability. The waiting room was filled with expensive furniture and financial magazines, clearly designed to impress elderly clients who associated luxury with competence. When we were finally escorted into his private office, I found myself face to face with a man who looked exactly like what I would expect from a financial predator. Impeccably dressed, artificially charming, and possessed of the kind of smooth confidence that came from years of successful manipulation. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said, rising from behind an enormous desk to shake my hand with just the right amount of gentle firmness. "It's such a pleasure to meet you. Marcus and Jessica have told me so much about your situation, and I'm confident we can find some solutions that will make your life much easier." I allowed him to guide me to a chair positioned slightly lower than his own, a subtle power play designed to make me feel physically diminished and psychologically subordinate. "Thank you for taking the time to see me, Mr. Reeves. I understand you're very busy." "Never too busy to help someone in your position," he assured me. "Now, Marcus and Jessica have explained that you're feeling a bit overwhelmed by your financial responsibilities. That's perfectly understandable for someone your age, and there's no shame in admitting when you need help." The immediate assumption that I needed help because of my age, rather than any specific demonstrated incapacity, revealed his underlying prejudices and methodology. He was operating from a script designed to make elderly clients feel ashamed of their independence and grateful for his intervention. "I do feel confused sometimes," I admitted. "Numbers used to make sense to me, but lately they seem so complicated." David nodded with practiced sympathy. "That's very common. The financial world has become increasingly complex, and even professionals sometimes struggle to keep up with all the changes. That's exactly why you need someone like me to handle these burdens for you." For the next hour, David Reeves deployed every manipulation tactic in the financial predator's playbook. He used complex jargon to confuse me, cited fake statistics to create urgency, and repeatedly emphasized how much better my life would be once I stopped worrying about money management. When I asked questions that showed any degree of financial sophistication, he deflected them by suggesting that such details were too complicated for me to understand. "The beauty of my approach," he explained, "is that you don't need to understand the technical aspects. You just need to trust me to handle everything while you focus on enjoying your retirement." The word trust coming from his mouth felt like a physical assault. He was asking me to surrender control of my life's work to someone I had just met, based on nothing more than his assurances that he knew what was best for me. It was the kind of trust that predators demanded from their victims. Trust without verification or accountability. "It does sound wonderful to not have to worry about these things anymore," I said. "But maybe I should have my lawyer review these documents first?" The suggestion clearly annoyed him, though he tried to hide it behind a patient smile. "Mrs. Hartwell, I understand the impulse to seek multiple opinions, but honestly, involving lawyers at this stage will just complicate things unnecessarily and cost you a lot of money in legal fees. These are standard wealth management agreements that thousands of my clients have signed without any problems." Marcus leaned forward supportively. "Aunt Eleanor, David is right. Your lawyer will probably just try to talk you out of making positive changes because that's what lawyers do. They make money by creating problems, not solving them." The coordinated pressure from both men was designed to isolate me from my support systems and make me feel like seeking outside advice was somehow foolish or wasteful. It was a classic technique used by abusers to maintain control over their victims, and recognizing it made me even more determined to see this through to the end. "I suppose you're right," I said hesitantly. "I do worry too much about things." David's smile became genuinely warm for the first time. "Exactly. And once you sign these agreements, you'll never have to worry about financial decisions again. I'll handle everything, and you can focus on the things that really matter, like spending time with your loving family. The irony of him describing Marcus and Jessica as loving family while they sat beside me plotting to steal my independence was almost too much to bear. But I forced myself to smile and nod as if his words brought me comfort rather than rage. "Where do I sign?" I asked. I held the pen in my trembling hand, staring down at the signature line that would supposedly transfer control of my entire financial life to David Reeves. The silence in the room was thick with anticipation as Marcus, Jessica, and David waited for me to complete what they believed was the final step in their carefully orchestrated plan. "Take your time, Mrs. Hartwell," David said softly, his voice dripping with false compassion. "I know this is a big step, but I promise you won't regret trusting me with your future." I looked up at him with eyes that I hoped conveyed gratitude, mixed with uncertainty. "I just want to make sure I'm doing the right thing. You really think this will make my life easier?" "Absolutely," Marcus chimed in eagerly. "No more worrying about investment decisions or market fluctuations. No more struggling to understand complicated financial statements. David will handle everything." Jessica reached over and patted my free hand. "Eleanor, sweetie, this is exactly what you need. You've been so stressed lately, so confused about things that used to be easy for you. This will give you peace of mind." Their words were carefully chosen to reinforce the narrative of my decline while positioning themselves as my saviors. They had spent weeks building this moment, documenting every instance of my supposed confusion, every sign of my physical limitations, every indication that I was no longer capable of managing my own affairs. What they didn't know was that I had been building toward this moment too, but for entirely different reasons. I set the pen down carefully and looked around the room at their expectant faces. "Before I sign this, I just want to make sure I understand everything correctly. Mr. Reeves, you're saying that once I sign these documents, you'll have complete authority to make investment decisions with my money?" "That's right," he confirmed. "Full discretionary authority to buy and sell securities, move funds between accounts, and implement investment strategies that will maximize your returns while minimizing your risk. And Marcus and Jessica will have access to information about all of these transactions?" David glanced at Marcus before nodding. "As your designated family contacts, yes. They'll receive regular updates about your account performance and any major decisions I make on your behalf." I picked up the pen again, then hesitated. "I'm sorry. I know I'm being slow about this, but I want to make sure I haven't missed anything important. Could you explain one more time exactly what happens to my money once I sign?" The question clearly tested David's patience, but he maintained his professional demeanor. "Mrs. Hartwell, your funds will be transferred to investment accounts under my management. I'll diversify your portfolio across various asset classes to ensure steady growth while protecting your principal. You'll receive monthly statements showing your account balances and performance. And if I ever want to access my money for personal expenses, you'll simply need to submit a request through Marcus or Jessica, who can coordinate with my office to process any withdrawals you need. It's actually much more convenient than trying to manage these things yourself." The casual mention that I would need permission from my nephew and his wife to access my own money should have been the final red flag for anyone who wasn't already committed to this course of action. But I nodded as if this arrangement sounded perfectly reasonable. "I think I understand now," I said, bringing the pen closer to the signature line. "This really will make everything so much simpler." Just as the pen touched the paper, I paused and looked up with sudden concern. "Oh dear, I just thought of something. What about my current financial advisor? I should probably let Patricia Sullivan know about these changes, shouldn't I?" The mention of my attorney's name caused an immediate shift in the room's atmosphere. David's smile faltered slightly, and I caught Marcus and Jessica exchanging worried glances. "Actually," David said carefully, "it might be better to wait on that. Lawyers sometimes complicate these transitions unnecessarily, and we want to make sure everything goes smoothly for you. Marcus leaned forward with renewed urgency. Aunt Eleanor, you don't need to involve Patricia in every little decision. She charges you hundreds of dollars an hour just to read documents that David is explaining to you for free. Besides, Jessica added, Patricia doesn't specialize in investment management. This is really outside her area of expertise. Their coordinated effort to discourage me from contacting my attorney was exactly what Patricia had predicted would happen. Financial predators always tried to isolate their victims from legal counsel, knowing that any competent lawyer would immediately recognize the exploitation taking place. You're probably right, I said, though I made sure to sound uncertain. I just don't want to do anything that might get me in trouble later. Mrs. Hartwell, David said, his voice taking on a slightly sharper edge, I can assure you that everything we're doing here is completely legal and in your best interest. However, if you're having second thoughts about moving forward, perhaps we should reschedule this meeting for another time. The threat was subtle but clear. If I continued to ask questions or express hesitation, they would interpret it as a sign that I was becoming suspicious rather than confused. My window for maintaining the illusion of grateful compliance was closing rapidly. No, I said quickly. I don't want to waste any more of your valuable time. I'm sure you know what's best. I moved the pen toward the signature line again, but this time I let it slip from my fingers and clatter to the floor. Oh goodness, I'm so clumsy lately. My hands don't seem to work the way they used to. Marcus immediately bent to retrieve the pen, and in that moment of distraction, I pressed a small button on my purse that activated a recording device Patricia had given me. From this point forward, every word spoken in the room would be captured, with crystal clarity. Here you go, Aunt Eleanor, Marcus said, handing me the pen with exaggerated patience. Just your name on this line, and we'll take care of everything else. I gripped the pen carefully and lowered it toward the paper one final time, but instead of signing my name, I set the pen down deliberately and looked up at David with a smile. That was entirely different from any expression I had worn since entering his office. Actually, Mr. Reeves, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm not going to be signing these documents today. Or ever. The silence that followed was deafening. David's face went through a rapid series of expressions, from confusion to surprise to barely contained anger. Marcus and Jessica looked like they had been physically struck. I'm sorry, David said slowly. I thought we had agreed that this arrangement would be beneficial for everyone involved. I reached into my purse and pulled out a different set of documents, ones that Patricia had prepared for exactly this moment. Oh, it will be beneficial, just not in the way you were expecting. You see, gentlemen, I've been recording this entire conversation, and what I've captured is a textbook example of elder financial abuse. Marcus shot to his feet. Aunt Eleanor, what are you talking about? We're trying to help you. Help me, I repeated, my voice carrying a coldness that made him step backward. Marcus, dear, let me explain what you've actually been doing. For months, you've been systematically documenting my physical limitations and creating a false narrative of cognitive decline. You've photographed me in disheveled states, recorded conversations where I seemed confused, and built a case file designed to prove that I'm incompetent to manage my own affairs. Jessica's face had gone pale. Eleanor, you're not making sense. You've been having problems with your memory, with your walking, with basic daily tasks. We've been worried about you. I opened the folder I had brought and spread several photographs across David's desk. They were screenshots from my security camera system, showing Marcus and Jessica going through my mail, discussing my assets, and planning their strategy to gain control of my finances. These images were taken in my kitchen last month, I said calmly. Would you like me to play the audio that goes with them? The part where you discuss my net worth and plan to have me declared incompetent? Or perhaps you'd prefer to hear the Section where Jessica complains about having to pretend to care about my boring stories? The color drained from Marcus's face as he recognized the images. You were spying on us? Your own family? I was protecting myself from people who were using my trust to plan my destruction, I corrected. And Mr. Reeves, before you start calculating how to distance yourself from this situation, you should know that I've been researching your business practices. The pattern of targeting elderly clients through their family members, the high-pressure sales tactics, the isolation from legal counsel, it's all very well documented. David had recovered his composure and was clearly shifting into damage control mode. Mrs. Hartwell, I think you may be misinterpreting some perfectly legitimate business practices. Everything I do is fully regulated and transparent. I pulled out another document and slid it across his desk. Then you won't mind explaining this complaint that was filed against you with the Securities and Exchange Commission last month, or this one from 3 months ago, or the class action lawsuit that's currently being prepared by a group of your former clients who lost their life savings to your investment strategies. The document was real, something Patricia's investigator had uncovered during their research into David's background. His face went ashen as he realized that his carefully constructed facade was crumbling. How did you get this? He demanded. The same way I got copies of your communications with Marcus and Jessica over the past 6 months, I replied. You see, when you target someone with my background in financial services, you should probably make sure they're actually as helpless as they appear to be. I turned to Marcus and Jessica, who were both staring at me as if I had transformed into someone they didn't recognize. In a sense, I had. The confused, vulnerable elderly woman they thought they knew had never really existed. She was a performance, carefully crafted to give them exactly what they wanted to see while I gathered the evidence I needed to destroy them. Marcus, I said softly, do you remember when you were 12 and you stole $20 from my purse to buy a video game? I knew about it immediately, but I never said anything because I wanted to see if you would confess and return the money. You never did. That was the first time I realized that you might not have the moral compass I thought I was helping you develop. His mouth opened and closed soundlessly, clearly struggling to process the revelation that I had known about his theft all along. And Jessica, I continued, when you convinced Marcus to ask me for $50,000 for your wedding, claiming it was important to have a ceremony that honored your cultural traditions, I knew you were lying. I attended your first wedding, the small civil ceremony you had 6 months before our big celebration. But I paid for the second wedding anyway because I thought maybe you would grow into the kind of person who deserved my trust. Jessica's carefully maintained composure finally cracked. You knew? All this time you knew we were lying and you still gave us money? I gave you chances, I corrected. Opportunity after opportunity to prove that you were capable of honesty and gratitude. Instead, you interpreted my generosity as weakness and my trust as stupidity. David Reeves had been edging toward the door during this exchange, clearly hoping to escape before the situation deteriorated further. But I wasn't finished with him yet. Mr. Reeves, please don't leave. We haven't discussed your compensation yet. He froze, his hand on the doorknob. My compensation? For the valuable lesson you've provided about the predators who target vulnerable seniors. You see, I've been working with the State Attorney General's office on a project to identify and prosecute elder financial abuse. Your attempted manipulation of what you believed was a confused elderly woman has provided us with perfect evidence of your methodology. I pulled out my phone and showed him the screen, which displayed an active call to a number he couldn't see. I've been broadcasting this entire conversation to a team of investigators who have been building a case against you for months. They're particularly interested in your partnership with Marcus and Jessica, since it demonstrates how you recruit family members to help you identify and access potential victims. The blood drained from David's face as he realized the full scope of his exposure. You can't do this. I haven't actually taken any of your money. No crime has been committed. Attempted elder financial abuse is still a crime, Mr. Reeves, and conspiracy to commit financial fraud carries significant penalties, especially when it involves targeting vulnerable populations. But I'm sure you'll have plenty of time to research the relevant statutes while you're waiting for your trial. Marcus had sunk back into his chair, his head in his hands. Aunt Eleanor, I never meant for things to go this far. It started as just trying to help you, and then David convinced us that you really were becoming incompetent. Is that what you tell yourself? I asked. That you were helping me when you photographed me in my pajamas to use as evidence of my decline. That you were protecting me when you went through my private financial documents and shared them with a stranger? That you were showing love when you planned to have me declared incompetent so you could steal my house? Jessica was crying now, though whether from genuine remorse or fear of consequences was impossible to determine. We thought, you were getting confused. Your walking was getting slower. You seemed to forget things. You looked disheveled. My walking is slower because I have arthritis in my knee, something I've managed successfully for years without it affecting my mental capacity. The forgetfulness and disheveled appearance were performances designed to give you exactly what you wanted to see. I needed you to feel confident in your plan so you would reveal the full scope of your intentions. I stood up slowly, deliberately taking my time in a way that had nothing to do with physical limitations and everything to do with the dramatic impact of the moment. The tragic irony, Jessica, is that if you had simply asked me for help with your financial problems, I might have been willing to assist you. If you had approached me with honesty instead of manipulation, we might have found a solution that didn't require destroying my independence. Marcus looked up at me with tears in his eyes. Is there any way to fix this? Any way to make it right? The time for making things right passed when you decided to treat me like an enemy to be conquered rather than family to be cherished. You complained about my slow walking, but you never bothered to ask why I was taking my time or if there was anything you could do to help. Instead, you saw my careful pace as an opportunity to build a case against my competence. I gathered my documents and returned them to my purse with the same deliberate movements that had characterized my performance over the past weeks. But now those movements carried a different meaning. They weren't signs of decline or confusion. They were the actions of someone who was completely in control of the situation. Mr. Reeves, I said, turning back to the financial advisor who was still frozen by the door. You'll be hearing from the authorities within the next few hours. I suggest you use that time to contact a criminal defense attorney, because the evidence against you is overwhelming. Mrs. Hartwell, he said desperately, surely we can work something out. I'm willing to compensate you for any inconvenience this may have caused. The only compensation I want is knowing that you'll never be able to target another vulnerable senior the way you tried to target me. Your business model depends on finding people who are isolated, confused, and desperate for help. Unfortunately for you, I was none of those things. I turned to Marcus and Jessica one final time. You have until tomorrow morning to remove your belongings from my house. After that, I'll have the locks changed and any remaining items will be donated to charity. Marcus stood up shakily. Aunt Eleanor, please, where are we supposed to go? How are we supposed to live? I suppose you'll have to figure that out the same way millions of other adults do, without exploiting elderly relatives. You might try getting jobs and living within your means, though I realize that's a foreign concept to both of you. Jessica wiped her eyes and looked at me with something that might have been genuine remorse. I'm sorry, Eleanor. I really am. I know you probably don't believe me, but I never wanted it to go this far. You're right, I said simply. I don't believe you. Your apology is motivated by consequences, not conscience. If my plan hadn't succeeded, you would be celebrating right now while I sat in some sterile apartment wondering what happened to my life. I walked toward the door, moving with the same measured pace that had started this entire ordeal. but now my careful steps carried me toward freedom rather than manipulation, toward justice rather than exploitation. "One more thing," I said, pausing at the threshold. "Marcus, you asked me once why I never had children of my own. The answer is that I was too busy raising you, sacrificing my own opportunities to give you the education and support you needed to build a successful life. I never regretted that choice until today." The drive home was the most peaceful I had felt in months. As I navigated the familiar streets at my own deliberate pace, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me to this point. What had started as complaints about my walking speed had evolved into a comprehensive plan to steal my independence. But it had also revealed truths about the people I thought I could trust. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat in my car for a few extra minutes, savoring the knowledge that this was still my home, that my independence was intact, and that the predators who had tried to destroy me were now facing the consequences of their actions. My phone rang as I was unlocking my front door. It was Patricia, calling to check on the outcome of the meeting. "How did it go?" she asked immediately. "Perfectly. We got everything we needed on tape, plus some additional admissions that will make the prosecutor's job much easier." "And how are you feeling about everything?" I considered the question as I looked around my living room, seeing it with new eyes now that it was truly mine again. "Relieved, sad about Marcus and Jessica, but not sorry about what we did. They made their choices, and now they have to live with the consequences." "What's next for you?" "I think I'm going to take a very long, very slow walk around my neighborhood," I said. "And for the first time in months, I'm going to enjoy every single step." After hanging up with Patricia, I changed into my walking shoes and stepped outside into the afternoon sunshine. As I began my familiar route through the tree-lined streets of my neighborhood, I thought about the irony of how this story had unfolded. Marcus and Jessica had complained about my slow walking, using it as evidence that I was declining and needed their intervention. They saw my careful pace as a weakness to be exploited, a sign that I was becoming a burden rather than remaining an independent woman. But my deliberate movements had actually been a source of strength. They had given me time to observe, to think, to plan, and to see through their manipulation before it was too late. While they were rushing toward their goal of financial control, I was taking the time I needed to build an unassailable case against them. The truly satisfying part was that their own greed had been their downfall. If they had been content with smaller amounts of money, more reasonable requests for help, they might never have triggered my suspicions. But their appetite for control had been so comprehensive, their manipulation so aggressive, that they had made it impossible for me to ignore what they were doing. As I walked past the houses where I had lived as a neighbor for decades, greeting other residents who had watched me maintain this same routine through all seasons and circumstances, I realized that my slow walking had never been about physical limitation. It had been about taking the time to appreciate my surroundings, to notice details that others missed, to move through the world with intention rather than urgency. That evening, I received a call from the prosecutor handling David Reeves's case. The evidence we had gathered was more than sufficient to pursue charges against all three conspirators, and my testimony would help establish a pattern of elder abuse that could protect other potential victims. "Mrs. Hartwell," the prosecutor said, "I want you to know that your courage in pursuing this case is going to make a real difference. Most victims of elder financial abuse never report the crimes against them, either because they're too ashamed or because the perpetrators are family members they're reluctant to prosecute. I'm not most victims," I replied, "and I think it's important for predators to understand that not every elderly person is an easy target." As I hung up the phone, I reflected on the strange education this experience had provided. I had learned that the people I trusted most were capable of betraying me in ways I never imagined possible, but I had also learned that my own resources, my intelligence, my experience, my ability to read people and situations, were far from diminished by age. The next morning, I watched from my window as Marcus and Jessica loaded their belongings into a rental truck. They moved with the quick, desperate efficiency of people who knew they were no longer welcome. I felt no satisfaction in their obvious distress, but I also felt no regret about the consequences they were facing. Marcus knocked on my door one final time before they left. When I answered, he looked like he had aged years in the space of a few weeks. "Aunt Eleanor," he said quietly, "I know you'll probably never forgive me, but I want you to know that I really did love you. I just got lost somewhere along the way." I studied his face, looking for signs of the boy I had once known, the child who had seemed so grateful for my help and support. He was still there, buried under layers of entitlement and greed, but I no longer felt responsible for excavating him. "I loved you too, Marcus," I said. "That's why this hurts so much. But love without respect is meaningless, and you stopped respecting me long before you started planning to steal from me." He nodded, accepting the truth of my words, even though they clearly caused him pain. "I hope someday I can become the kind of person who deserves your forgiveness." "I hope so too," I said, "but that's work you'll have to do without me." After they drove away, I stood in my empty house and felt the profound silence of solitude. For the first time in months, I was truly alone, free from the constant vigilance required to protect myself from people who should have been protecting me. I made myself a cup of tea and sat in my favorite chair, looking out at the garden I had cultivated over decades of careful tending. Like my walking routine, gardening required patience and attention to detail. You couldn't rush the growth of plants or force them to bloom before they were ready. You had to trust the process, provide consistent care, and wait for the results of your investment. Perhaps that was the lesson I should have learned earlier about relationships. I had invested so much love and support in Marcus, hoping that my care would eventually yield the kind of gratitude and respect that healthy families shared. But you can't force emotional growth any more than you can force a flower to bloom. Some people simply aren't capable of the kind of reciprocal love that makes relationships meaningful. As the afternoon sun slanted through my windows, I began planning the next chapter of my life. At 72, I had been given an unexpected gift, the chance to start over without the burden of relationships built on false foundations. I was free to choose how to spend my remaining years, unburdened by the obligation to support people who saw my generosity as weakness rather than strength. That evening, I took my longest walk in months, moving at my own careful pace through neighborhoods that sparkled with the lights of families gathered for dinner. I no longer felt excluded from that warmth. Instead, I felt liberated from the exhausting performance of gratitude that had characterized my interactions with Marcus and Jessica. When I finally returned home, my phone was ringing. It was Patricia, calling with an update on the legal proceedings. "David Reeves has agreed to cooperate with the investigation in exchange for a reduced sentence," she reported. "His testimony is going to help us identify dozens of other victims and potentially recover millions of dollars in stolen assets." And Marcus and Jessica? They'll face charges for conspiracy and attempted elder abuse, but their cooperation will also be taken into consideration. They're looking at significant fines and community service, but probably not jail time for first-time offenders. I found myself oddly relieved by this news. I wanted them to face consequences for their actions, but I didn't want to see them destroyed. Perhaps there was still hope that they could learn from this experience and become better people, even if that growth happened without my involvement. "There's one more thing," Patricia said. "The Attorney General's office wants to know if you'd be willing to speak at a conference about elder financial abuse. Your case is being held up as an example of how seniors can protect themselves from exploitation." The idea of sharing my story with other elderly people who might be facing similar threats was appealing. If my experience could help even one person recognize the signs of financial abuse and take protective action, then perhaps something positive could emerge from this painful situation. "I'd be honored to speak," I said, though I should probably mention that my walking pace might make for a rather leisurely presentation. Patricia laughed. "Something tells me that your deliberate approach to communication will be exactly what the audience needs to hear." As I prepared for bed that night, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me to this point. What had started as a simple observation about my walking pace had evolved into a comprehensive plan to steal my independence and dignity. But it had also revealed resources within myself that I hadn't fully appreciated. I had discovered that age hadn't diminished my ability to think strategically, to read people accurately, or to protect myself from those who would take advantage of perceived vulnerability. If anything, my years of experience had made me more capable of recognizing manipulation and responding effectively to threats. The next morning, I woke to the sound of birds singing in my garden and the knowledge that every step I took that day would be my own choice. There would be no one monitoring my pace, documenting my movements, or using my careful navigation of the world as evidence against me. I made my morning coffee and sat down to write the speech I would give at the BA Attorney General's Conference. The opening line came to me immediately. They complained about my slow walking, but they moved even slower when I froze their accounts. It was a perfect summary of how the tables had turned, how the very people who had tried to use my physical limitations against me had found themselves immobilized by the consequences of their own greed and manipulation. As I continued writing, I thought about all the elderly people who might be sitting in similar situations, wondering if their family members really had their best interests at heart, or if their slower pace through life was being interpreted as an invitation for exploitation. My message to them would be simple: trust your instincts, document everything, and never let anyone convince you that age has made you incapable of protecting yourself. The predators who target seniors count on their victims being isolated, confused, and grateful for any attention. But awareness and preparation could turn those supposed vulnerabilities into strengths. The sun was climbing higher as I finished my speech, and it was time for my morning walk. I laced up my shoes with the same deliberate care I had always used, checking each loop and knot to make sure everything was secure. As I stepped outside into the crisp morning air, I smiled at the thought that this simple routine had somehow become the center of such a complex drama. My careful pace had been both the excuse for their manipulation and the key to my salvation. I began walking down my street, moving at the same measured pace I had maintained for years. But now every step carried a different meaning. They weren't signs of decline or vulnerability. They were evidence of wisdom, patience, and the kind of careful attention to detail that had allowed me to outmaneuver people who thought they were smarter than me. Behind me, my house stood empty of the people who had tried to steal it, and ahead of me lay a future that was entirely my own to determine. It had taken 72 years and one elaborate deception to fully understand the power of moving through the world at my own pace, but the lesson had been worth the wait. They had complained about my slow walking, never realizing that every careful step was leading me toward their downfall. And now, as I continued my measured journey through a life that was once again completely my own, I couldn't help but appreciate the poetic justice of it all. Sometimes the slowest person in the room is actually the one who reaches the destination first. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.